Please welcome Congressman Steve King.
Thank you. This narrative is about Davy Crockett. When he was running for office for the Congress in Tennessee, he was this guy that was a young guy that was trying to crack in. And so they went around on the circuit and gave their stump speeches. And back in those days, they really were stump speeches. They stood on a stump and gave their speech. And that's actually happened at my house. Dan Quayle came to my place to celebrate my 50th birthday. And we had been doing stump speeches there for our political events that we would hold because I had a stump right there in the right spot. It was an old elm tree that died and from Dutch elm disease. I cut it off. And then anybody that was going to speak at one of our events, they climbed up on the stump and spoke. And my wife finally got tired of that old stump sitting there, and she thought it should come out. And so I got the excavator and tracked it up there and dug the stump out. Well, sure enough, about the time the grass grows back, Dan Quayle shows up at our place, which, by invitation, of course, and he was wonderful. But we thought, we can't have a speech from the Vice President of the United States unless we do it from a stump. So my boys went out and took a piece of firewood about this big around, that one piece of the log that you cut off right at the ground level so the roots start out. And they brought it over there and set it in that spot where the stump used to be. And I introduced Dan Quayle to speak from the stump, and he climbed up on the stump and gave his first stump speech. And I remember the AP reporter's name was Weber. He was there, and he got a picture of that, and he lost. It was digital cameras were just first out. He lost the digital picture in his camera, and he was just frantic because he said, "That's the best picture I've ever taken in my life." And folks went to work and found the picture, and it went worldwide with Dan Quayle on that stump, an AP photo. But Davy Crockett was following two seasoned politicians, and he was a young guy trying to crack into the market and trying to run for office. Well, because he didn't have seniority and because he was disrespected because he was just viewed as a kid, then he had to speak last. He was third in the line. The other two guys, the seasoned old salts, would speak, and then he would speak. Well, so Davy had followed them around in each one of their stops, and he had spoken last, listened to every one of those speeches, and then he got to speak, and of course they weren't paying any attention. When they were done, they generally left. And so Davy finally, at one of those stops, he said, I've had to go last every time. And why don't you all let me just go first once? Let's just change it around and let this young guy be the first speaker. And so they relented and let Davy Crockett go first. And he got up on the stump and he gave that one politician's speech verbatim. Now, what are you going to say when somebody gives your speech and you're up next? Yeah, there's nothing much you can say. And so Davy had memorized his competition speech, and he just got up and gave it. There's a bond that happens in this country if you believe in each other. If we have a common cause, a common belief, our faith, our morals, our values, our understanding of history, the direction of the destiny of America, that binds us together. Phyllis has brought so many people together over the years because you have led on principle and been so with utter clarity. And I have to say this every chance I have, whether Phyllis is in the room or not, behind her back or to her face, she is the clearest political thinker of our time. No one takes the principles of American exceptionalism and boils them down to succinct statements and policy than Phyllis Schlafly. No one sees through the garbage that's out there in the media, and cuts through it with such clarity as Phyllis. No one is as relentless. And so we all have something to aspire to. And that's my point. Well, that's an American value, the aspirational American value. And the theme here is American exceptionalism this morning. And we don't talk about it enough. I mean, I grew up with it through the dialogue. And I believe that each one of us that were responsible adults would see where we fit in the country and the world. And we'd go about, I don't know if you can imagine what a giant multidimensional spreadsheet would be, about an interrelational spreadsheet. But just think of that, 316 million people in this country, and each one of you have a little cell on that spreadsheet. And in it, you can put the things you do every day to contribute to this country and this world being a better place. And that's the values that you control. So if you get up and you go to work and you get on your knees and you pray and you read the Constitution and you get anchored with American values and American history and you pay forward and help your neighbors and do all of those things that were examples that were set for us by Jesus Christ, Well, our founding fathers anchored to the things we need to anchor to. There is a baseline for us, a place to always come back to. And it is the Constitution, it is the pillars of American exceptionalism, because our founding fathers understood that there were essential values of humanity, and we would always react in a similar fashion as a society, but they wanted to protect the rights of the minority against the tyranny of the majority. That's why we're not a democracy, but a republic. And these pillars of American exceptionalism, I'll just list some of them for you. Go to the Bill of Rights, and you'll find most of them, actually. And the highest number are right there in the First Amendment: freedom of speech, religion, the press, and assembly. Now, that's First Amendments. So we speak out, we worship as we please. We've got to have a free press, whether we like what they write or not. Sooner or later, the truth is going to come out, especially in this modern digital era that we're in. And we have to have the ability to assemble like we're doing here, or assemble like we did in the Lower Senate Park on Monday, and press for the rule of law and jobs for Americans. There's 4 pillars of American exceptionalism right there in the First Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms is another one. And you can go on. No double jeopardy, which looks like George Zimmerman might be facing if the Justice Department decides they're going to go outside the bounds of their constitutional directive. And the right to property that exists to a lesser degree now than it did before the Kelo decision. Bill's paying attention to that one too. But the right to property, and then you can go on down the line: the right to face your accuser in a court of law, the right to the values, the rights that devolve to the states or the people, respectively, if they're not enumerated to the United States Congress. All of those are components they are all pillars of American exceptionalism, but they aren't all of them. There are more of them. One is we're a free enterprise economy. And if you're an immigrant into the United States, a legal immigrant into the United States, and you aspire to take the naturalization test, there are some flashcards you can get there, and it's available on the internet too. I took the test. I could actually pass the citizenship test today. I wanted to make sure I could. But these flashcards will say, who's the founder of our country? Snap it over, it says George Washington. Who emancipated the slaves? Abraham Lincoln. What is the economic system of the United States? Barack Obama would fail this question. Free enterprise capitalism. And now what? 47% of the students in college don't believe in capitalism? What is happening, America? That's because the leftists have done this thing. They have verbal jackhammers. They have keyboard jackhammers. And they are chiseling away as if they had a jackhammer at the pillars, the beautiful marble pillars of American exceptionalism. They don't like the Constitution. They don't love this country. They don't appreciate the greatness of America. They don't think of this country the way I do. And I remember a conversation I had with a conservative Democrat state senator down the well of the Iowa Senate back in the 90s sometime. And I said to him, I believe that the Declaration of Independence was written with divine guidance. Now, the Bible's written with divine inspiration. And I'd say divine guidance is just one step below divine inspiration. So the Declaration is not quite the Bible, but it was written with divine guidance. I believe that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were also written with divine guidance. I believe that God moved our founding fathers around on this continent like men on a chessboard to shape this nation that we have. And throughout that, we have the foundation to extend the greatness of America to please Him. And so if you look at the world that way, and you see that the founding fathers understood these principles. Now, where did this come from? And you can go back through the classical writings and pick it out of a number of the classical philosophers. Generally, the English-speaking age of enlightenment will inform us all we need to. The people over on the other languages in France and Germany that emerged in that era, or this era for that matter, were utopianists. And so I don't adhere to their thinking very much. But the pillars of American exceptionalism were defined by our founding fathers. They're written into the Declaration. They're written into the Bill of Rights and the Constitution itself. You add to that free enterprise capitalism, and then you can add to that. Where does this thing that I call American vigor come from? Why are we a can-do people? Why are we a more robust civilization than any other civilization on the planet? Well, I can explain that to you in a number of ways, and I'm going to say first that the foundation of it is these pillars of American exceptionalism that I have defined, a few others that maybe I'm overlooking here this morning, we could not, and you think about reverse engineering. If you wanted to, reverse engineering is an expression we use where you take a product and you take it apart and figure out how they made it, then you put it back together again. They did that when September 11th hit us. An American invented the cockpit door and patented the cockpit door. The Chinese bought exactly one of them and took it apart, reverse engineered it, and started making their own, stealing our intellectual property. So that's what reverse engineering does. But could you take the United States of America and reverse engineer it back up on the historical chain of events and go down another path some way and produce a better country, more of a country than we have today? I would say I could do that over the last, say, 4.5 years. Lots of things I'd like to change. A few elections I'd like to change. But by and large, where the country has made those distinct turns, it has turned us into a country even greater than we would have imagined. I don't believe that you can reverse engineer America and come up with a better country. But I believe our founding fathers were divinely guided. And when I said that to that conservative Democrat state senator, he looked at me like I had gone nuts. And he said, "Don't you understand? Our founding fathers were not Christian, they were deists. Don't you understand that this is just a cultural and a historical evolution, and we're this country that we are by pure happenstance? It just happened." Just happened? Our founding fathers didn't think it just happened. And you don't believe that either. It was divinely guided. And so that's how powerful a legacy has been handed to us. And it's how important it is that we continue. But the reverse engineering part of this is America couldn't be the great country that it is if you took away freedom of speech. If you did that, our ideas collapse around us and we huddle up. And if you put the brightest person in America, in a country, in the world for that matter, in a phone booth and say, "Now produce this long list of good ideas." If you can't interact with other people, your brain's not going to work as good as it would otherwise. So when freedom of speech is suppressed, so are our ideas, so are our aspirations. If freedom of the press were suppressed, we couldn't exchange our ideas. Freedom of assembly, same thing. And you go on, the right to keep and bear arms. The deterrent for tyrants is the right to keep and bear arms. And we would not be the country we are today if we didn't have that right, and we wouldn't have the robust military that defends our God-given rights if we didn't have the Second Amendment. Who are the people that go out there and put on a uniform and take on the enemy? There are a lot of them are those young kids that grew up out in the hills and the woods with a gun in their hands. And they go out and defend our freedom and ask for nothing in return. So each one of these pieces of American exceptionalism, the pillars of American exceptionalism, are necessary for us to be the country we are today. But there's another one. I said free enterprise capitalism. The other side of that is this American vigor component. And it comes from this. All of those components, all of those pillars of American exceptionalism give us vigor and help to explain it, but it's not the full explanation. Here's another. What if you could go out across the planet with 7 billion people on the planet and have essentially, and over time this has been the case, the 48 lower states of the United States and Alaska and Hawaii included, we have received from as far as I know, every country in the world, legal immigrants who aspired to come to America. Now, I think there's a limit to how many we can bring here and how many we can assimilate here. But think of what happens when you have someone sitting in a foreign country and they see what America does and they start to learn and understand America's history and, they see the Statue of Liberty, and embodied within the image of the Statue of Liberty are all of these things that I've talked about, American exceptionalism. And out of those donor civilizations, I call them, those countries, comes not just a cross-section that you could randomly pull out of there, but you get the vigor of the planet. You get the dreamers. You get the can-do people. You get the cream of the crop. It's hard to get here. It's been hard to get here. And so there was a natural filter that was set up that selected, because of the natural filter, the people with aspirations to come here. And we got the vigor of every donor civilization here in the United States. And we added to that, add to that, the generations who have been raised by that vigor since the time of, let's say, the founding of Jamestown in 1607. Now think of what that does. If every generation that's here and came here raised their children with the same dreams and the same aspirations with American vigor, can do, give me free enterprise, give me property rights, give me freedom of speech, and all of those pieces that I've talked about, and they put those tools to work to build the most robust economy anywhere in the history of the world. That's what's happened. So we have an American greatness and American exceptionalism for a lot of reasons, but we would, even with all of the pillars that I have listed here of American exceptionalism, if you take out of it the vigor that comes from the cream of the crop from donor civilizations, we would not be the great nation that we are today. If you just went out and took a random selection out of those cultures and civilizations, rather than those self-selected people that came here because they had a dream that they wanted to fulfill, that's the frosting on the cake of the pillars of American exceptionalism. And so I charge you with this, that Ronald Reagan talked about the shining city on the hill. And he described it always as the way America is, the way America has been, and the way America needed to protect and defend that vision of the shining city on the hill. But there's something else for us. There's a level above that shining city on the hill that we need to aspire to. And we need to take America onward and upward beyond that level of the shining city on the hill. And we can't get there unless we take out of the hands those people that have those verbal jackhammers and those keyboard jackhammers that are chiseling away, undermining the pillars of American exceptionalism. We need to take them on everywhere. Take them on the internet, take them on in the public forum, take them on by running for public office, by supporting people that do. Read, write, think. Don't think that your voice doesn't matter. Every word that's uttered matters to some degree, whether it's to a small degree or a large. You never know when you make a comment to someone in kindergarten if it might inspire them to tell the truth instead of a lie, to go make a friend instead of an enemy. You never know when you let somebody in front of you that's trying to get into the lane, how that causes them to be more courteous down the line to other people. And when you step up and do some work or take a position or give a speech, say something you believe in, you don't know how that inspires others. But I can tell you that when back in the early 80s, my congressman was Fred Grandy, and he came to one of my hometowns, Odebolt, a town of 1,100 people. First time a congressman had been to that little old town that I know of. I went there, and now I am just a young businessman with 3 little boys that are 2, 3, and 4 years old or so. And I sat down in that church basement where the meeting was. There were 80 people in there, and I remember looking around and counting. And Fred Grandy was presenting his idea of a National Health Care Act, which today I'd call it socialized medicine. And we didn't have that expression for his bill then, but he presented it, and I'm sitting in the front row, which I do that because I don't hear that great and I want to pay attention. And so he presented it, and then he said to the 80 people in the room, "How many of you are employers?" And I raised my hand, and I counted there were 11 others. So 12 of us out of the 80 were employers. And then he said, "Okay, how many of you provide health insurance for your employees?" And I had my hand up, and I was the only one. So he put his hands behind his back, and he walked over in front of me, and he leaned down, and he said, "And just how would this change the way you do business if my bill becomes the law the way I've described it?" And I answered him, generally what I do is say what's on my mind. And I said, "How would it change the way I do business? Probably not very much, unless you're going to compel me to pay for abortion, in which case I quite likely would no longer be an employer." Now, I didn't know I was in a pro-life community. It brought the house down. It surprised me, and that's when I learned that I wasn't the only one that thought like that. I wasn't the only one that believed like that. That there was almost, in my community, almost a universal position that life begins at the moment of conception, and it's sacred in all of its forms. And so that was one of those little things that energized me. You don't know when you might speak up and get that kind of reaction and be given that kind of confidence and inspiration to step forward and do more. You don't know when you might be talking to somebody in a quiet room somewhere and you give them the inspiration to speak up and they get that boost that they go out and do more. Throughout it all, define it this way: refurbish those beautiful marble pillars of American exceptionalism. If we all do that, then this country can become something even more than the shining city on the hill. If we fail to do that, the left will take over and we'll descend down into a place that I don't think you have imagined yet. And if I started to describe it, I'd leave you on a down note instead of an up note. Thanks very much. God bless you.